Hello lovers of the world, this is Sinta speaking. So today's video is a less scripted version of my usual videos. This is a short review on the literature currently written about K-pop and covers 11 articles from across different disciplines, and each contributes a small but still important aspect to the behemoth of a genre that is K-pop. I have a half-assed video script that I will occasionally refer to, but otherwise this video will be very loose and very relaxed compared to the amount of effort I would usually put into my videos that you may have seen if you are a subscriber. I'll also only be doing minimal editing because I have a lot of stuff going on at uni, and even though I still wanted to post weekly content, I had to lighten my load as much as possible. I still want to post stuff regularly, but of course, I have to take care of my mental health. And even though this is part of my mental health, like writing videos and reading about K-pop, which is something I love, I still have to make sure that I'm like focusing on what I should be prioritizing, which is studies. But yeah, I hope this will still be somewhat entertaining or insightful to whoever it is that usually watches my videos. Yeah, let's get into it. So my method for this video, I chose a collection of articles first, and then I grouped them together based on what they were predominantly preoccupied with. I show a lot of music videos, or I mention a lot of music videos here, and some of them are directly referenced in the articles themselves, but there are times where I would choose a song or a video that I feel is more representative of the themes or concepts that the article is talking about. Because there were lots of times where I would read an article and I'd go, oh, this is exactly like in so-and-so song or in this group's music video. So I'm not saying I'm an expert on K-pop, but I'm an expert on K-pop. Just kidding. If you've seen any of my videos before, you know I'm a big K-pop fan, so that's where all this knowledge comes from. And if you are a big K-pop fan too, then you'll likely know all of the songs that I mentioned in the video. But if you're not, or maybe you just haven't come across the songs that I mentioned here, I've put up cards throughout the video to direct you to each song that I'm talking about. Again, I'm doing only minimal editing, so I don't really want to put the songs here as well. I just don't have time for that. I'm recording this the night before it's supposed to go up, so you gotta cut me some slack, bro. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So the first question that I feel like pops up a lot in the literature that I've read before is just, how did we get here? Like, a lot of the Korean study scholars that seem to occupy the scholarship surrounding like Korean media and Korean pop culture, Korean music, they're really confused as to how K-pop kind of became big, depending, of course, on when the article was written. So, for example, I read these two chapters from this book that was written in 2006 called Korean Pop Music, Riding the Wave, edited by Keith Howard. Now, if you Keith Howard is actually, he contributes so much to the field of Korean music. It's kind of insane because he does a lot of traditional Korean music more so, but he does dabble in the K-pop side as well, and I just find it so fascinating. I just see his name pop up a lot. Him and Roald Maliankai, they turn up quite frequently. But anyway, moving on. So these two articles, as well as How Did We Get Here, which is a chapter by John Lee from a book called K-pop, Popular Music, Cultural Amnesia, and Economic Innovation in South Korea, that was written in 2015. And then I think that's an article by Keith Howard again, Mapping K-pop Past and Present. The content is more so about how K-pop got to this stage. So they predominantly talk about, you know, first the Chosun period, which lasted from 1392 to 1910, and then obviously World War II and the Japanese colonization, which kind of like go hand in hand. The Park Chung-hee administration, which was from 1963 to 1979. I should have included the Korean War in between Japanese colonization and Park Chung-hee administration. I think they started, the actual Korean War fighting was 1950 to 1953. So like them physically fighting was only 3 short years, but a lot of deaths happened. And technically North and South Korea are still fighting to this day, but there are no active like war zones as they were in 1950 to 1953. So yeah, and then 1993 is the civilian rule, which is once Park Chung-hee got assassinated in 1979, the democratization processes started occurring towards the 80s, and a lot of like these brutal uprisings and student protests happened, most famously in the, I think, oh my goodness, Gwangju uprising. But 1993 was the first year where civilian rule happened. I think it was Kim Yong-sam who was the first president who was like democratically elected. But anyway, so yeah, a lot of these articles are talking about how we got from the Chosun period to the Park Chung-hee administration, the processes that happened, social, political, and economic, the ways South Korea had changed over the decades, and leading up to basically Sotaeji and the boys, which is, in my opinion, and a lot of everybody's opinion, they're kind of like established as basically the pioneers of what we see as K-pop now. Because there was Korean pop music, Korean popular music existed before 1993, but the K-pop that we as a society are familiar now, it all got started because Sotaeji and the boys debuted in 1992. So that was before democratization. Okay, anyway. Okay, take two. So I actually tried to see if my links would work in a screen record, but it did not work, so you're just gonna have to watch them on your own time. But yeah, Sotaeji and the boys debuted in 1992 with their first song called Nan Arayo, and it was unlike anyone has ever seen. Like, quite literally, everybody was confused, everybody was shook. They didn't, like, it was the first anyone has ever tried to incorporate rap, metal, and dance in the same song in a mainstream national-wide audience. So yeah, they are heralded. This article kind of talks about how their use of rap and metal basically articulated what the Korean youth culture was going through at the time of globalization and democratization, and all these like restrictions and censorship laws started lifting, and like what they were going through in that period of time. They were immensely popular. So let's read through this quote. I also suggest Sotaeji's synthesis of American pop music styles, including rap, metal, rock, not just simple, wholesome adoptions of music and representation in American society, but constitute instead an efficient localization of global lexicas selectively redefined for the needs and sensibilities of Korean youth. Because of this, Sotaeji's music has been understood by Korean audiences as an important cultural icon with direct relevance to Korea, rather than an exercise in derivative stylistic imitation. I really like this quote. I did like a little mini review in my Music Monthly video. I don't remember which one it was in my channel before. And I basically said that I really liked how his approach to creating like a full-length project is what you kind of see still in K-pop today, like incorporating different genres, very EDM based. Listening to their debut album feels both like a throwback to a different time, but also it feels still contemporary in a way, because a lot of what they did back then we're still kind of doing now. And I don't know, I mean, you can kind of say that about like a lot of genres, I guess, but I think people always kind of talk about how K-pop changes. I mean, in a way it does, but K-pop kind of just stays the same in a lot of ways, and that's kind of cool. Yeah, I don't know how insightful that was, but I felt like I wanted to talk about it anyway. So yeah, moving on. Okay, so this is a less what do you call it, sympathetic, I guess, take on K-pop's industry over the years. The open global market of K-pop today comes at a price. Entertainment companies segment and fill markets with songs produced on an assembly line and based on pre-masticulated formula. As they strive to gain advantage on a trans-regional mercantile activity, they seek to control all aspects of production, thereby containing the creativity of artists. The censorship of government of earlier decades no longer arbitrates, but rather sponsors and promotes the activities of Korea's self-culture entrepreneurs. Now, actually, that's a very insightful, I mean, all of these are very insightful, but I think this definitely takes a lot from like Adorno and like culture industry, academia, you know, like a very tastes like critical theory, very critical of like the capitalism. It like seeped that the K-pop industry is like soaked in. You can't deny it. You can't take K-pop out of the capitalism. The C in capitalism stands for K-pop. I think you have to take into context that at the time that was kind of true. Like, looking back on it now as a person living in 2021, I would like fight tooth and nail for how K-pop is an important genre, because especially nowadays there are a lot of K-pop idols producing their own music and writing their own and playing a massive part in the production of their own music. They're not just vehicles for these songs and concepts anymore. They are kind of producing their own music. And I think it's not something we should overlook. I think as a K-pop fan, me, conscientious K-pop fan, I do look at the track list and I'm always happy when there's a member in there who's taking part in the production of the music. And whether that's because they want to cut costs or whether because of something more wholesome, which is that, oh, this person has talent in songwriting. I think that's still something that we should know. So K-pop has changed. Like, it's not just like entertainment companies churning out song after song after song. It's a lot more I don't want to say like authentic necessarily, because authentic is such a like buzzword that like music critics throw around just to sound, as if they're anyway. But I think it's a practice. The practices of like K-pop idols these days have changed since this article and the previous articles were written, and this one wasn't that confused because Keith Howard understood that this was a deliberate project by the government. It wasn't just like, oh, overnight the genre started like gaining a lot of attraction. No, there was like the government did a lot to try and like promote it overseas, because they were like, oh, there's an interest in this. And let's talk about gender. There, I read 2 articles, one for girl groups and one for boy groups. So the one I read for girl groups is Girls' Generation: Gender, Disempowerment, and K-pop by Stephen Epstein and James Turnbull, written in 2014. Now, I actually met Stephen Epstein just this year. He was a guest lecturer at my university, and he was nice to me because I talked to him and asked him questions. And he was like, if you want to talk, we can email. And I thought it was nice. This article talks about, despite the large number of girl groups and their seemingly assertive and confident personalities, the kind of empowerment that they bring to the table tends to be ambivalent. The way they are framed in music videos still boxes them into specific roles of femininity. So I'm So Hot is used as an example. Even though the song is meant to be an empowering song where the girls are confident and celebrating their status as highly desirable, the music video still paints them in a very objectifying way. I don't know why I keep deviating from my script when everything is written there for me. Otherwise I ramble on. But let's keep going. Anyway, well, I kind of liked his article. It is a little, I don't want to say problematic, because he is like an old white dude talking about like women empowerment in a genre that is mostly populated by young teenage girls. I think this quote perfectly captures what I had already kind of thought about K-pop and girl groups in general prior to like getting into academia. Although the elements of current packaging may be novel, the gender ideologies propagated by such groups such as blah 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 and similar ensembles have offered society, and young women in particular, at best, a highly ambivalent empowerment. Now, I think that kind of highly ambivalent empowerment is, I think, the best and most accurate phrase to describe the kind of things that you can get from girl groups. So yeah, the next article is K-pop idol boy bands and manufactured versatile masculinity. So this article talks about the range within boy group concepts and multiple representations of masculinity have become commodified. So the article mostly talks about 2PM. Their star persona and the masculinity it embodies has been constructed through performing various masculine forms such as beast-like, kawaii, and soft through diverse media agents including music programs, reality TV shows, and game shows. They are an exact embodiment of what I call manufactured versatile masculinity, often presented by South Korean idol boy bands. It is multi-layered, culturally mixed, and simultaneously contradictory, and most of all, strategically manufactured. Even though the article talks about 2PM, I want to bring in the example of TXT, who is, if you're a K-pop fan, a more recently debuted group. I think they debuted, oh my god, 2019? Yeah, that's almost 3 years ago. Anyway, this is kind of just like because I can't show the music video on the video right now, but this is basically all you need to know about the songs. Like, Puma is like such a, my goodness, a masculine. Anyway, and then Blue Hour by TXT is all cotton candy and pastel colors and crop tops, and it's so sweet. Blue Hour is my favorite TXT comeback, and you can't change my mind. Anyway, so I wanted to use TXT as like as an example because I want to show that it's still such a prevalent thing happening now. Like, even though this article was written like 2010 and it's talking about an older boy group, such processes and strategies in manufacturing all these like masculinities is still very prevalent today, and because it works. There's definitely a lot more about gender and K-pop out there, especially how queer fans in particular interact with the genre, but for the purposes of this presentation, I've only read one article about a boy group and a girl group each. Hopefully I'll do more in the future, like read more stuff in the future when if I do another literature review video. So this article, my goodness, this article is quite interesting because John Lee himself is a Korean scholar, and he is obviously very critical of how the K-pop industry is being used by the government to kind of promote Korea to people, so that Korea's like power starts growing, like I mentioned before. So yeah, this article sort of fits into the first category, where they more so try to trace the history of traditional Korean music, how it has been affected by large historical events, but they use that as evidence of K-pop as not really being a Korean cultural product because it's so completely devoid from that traditional Korean culture, which I think is quite interesting. And I like that they but I find it very interesting that they call the K in K-pop isn't really an indication of culture. It's more of a brand, which is something that the South Korean government uses to, like, promote Korean culture. It's not necessarily Korean culture even. It's just, not surprisingly, Korean culture remains something of the proverbial floating and empty signifier of contemporary cultural studies. Oh my god, I need to take a break soon. I'm talking way too much. So yeah, that's the it's an interesting question that it's kind of been floating around throughout academia throughout the decades, if you will, because like, what does the K in K-pop mean when there's not really a lot of Korean culture in the music? And this is a little off topic from the article and from the general question itself, but the question he poses is arguably the biggest discourse surrounding K-pop now, which is what does make the genre Korean? The genre took so many cues from like Japanese pop idol production back in the 80s and 90s, and then over time they started incorporating Western music styles, English lyrics, and even further blurred by the very presence of non-Korean idols. Now that was a pretty big discussion even before NCT debuted. But NCT's debut have seriously muddled up the already murky waters. The mechanics of NCT is very complicated and mostly irrelevant to this video, but what is important, so NCT, for those who don't know what NCT is, if you don't know who NCT is, go watch, what's their best song? I don't know. Touch. That's my favorite NCT song. Listen to that. Anyway, NCT is basically like this big group that SM announced back in 2016, and then the idea is that there will be a subunit within different regions that is specifically catered to that region. Right now, they only have most of the NCTs right now are Korean, but then the most recently debuted group is Wavy, which is a group that is supposed to be more Mando pop and is supposed to promote in China. There's something called the NCT Cinematic Universe. When Wavy debuted, their song was called Regular, but at the same time, they also released the Korean version and English version with the pre-existing with a pre-existing NCT subunit called NCT 127. The point is that there's 3 different versions of the same song in different languages, and then some person decided to clip those 3 together to create one song incorporating all 3 languages. And you can watch that in the description or something. And now maybe I should stop now because it's 30 minutes and this can just be a 10-minute video. I'll stop now. And maybe next week, if I don't have enough time, I can talk about fandom activities instead. Because I did have another video that I was going to do. It's my mystical, mysterious Seopyeonjem video that I've been talking about for 3 months now, but I haven't been able to release because it requires so much effort to release. So yeah, I think I'll stop now. I'll now edit this and I'll post this the next day. So thank you so much for listening to me talk for hopefully only 15 minutes. I'll see you guys next week with hopefully the Seopyeonjem music video, and if not, the part 2 of this lengthy presentation. So yeah, if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts and opinions on things, subscribe, and my social media links are in the description, as well as my Ko-fi page and my Patreon if you would like to support my work. I'll see you guys next week.